you know, we have a number of instruments on our neighbor planet Mars. I think it's a very thrilling thing. The first two, I don't think they were the first two. There might have been another small one, but Spirit and Opportunity went up, and then now, of course, we have the Curiosity rover, which, even if you're not geeky about space, if you have not watched the video of the lowering of Curiosity to the surface of Mars, I urge you to watch it. If you think human beings aren't inventive and brilliant at solving problems, landing a pickup truck on Mars will convince you that we can solve a lot of problems. But this particular piece has to do with the earlier rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, and an internet joke that kind of spun around the planet during the early days that they were doing their work on the planet. The rabbit on Mars. Do other animals tell jokes? Perhaps the play of young animals, in which they practice what will later become life-enhancing skills, the stalk, the pounce, the thrashing, is not so unlike what human beings do in attempting to learn what they will need to survive in the future. Of course, we live and direct our lives so much in the mind, so much in the richness and folly, and yes, beauty of what our minds can create, that our play often takes the form of jokes, a linguistic version of play. One of my recent favorites was the rabbit on Mars. NASA has landed 2 rovers, research gathering devices, on our neighboring planet, the one with soil so bloody with iron that it was named after the Roman god of war. How much more benign is our view? Let's do some geologic study of the soil and find out what it's really made of, and whether any forms of life might once have inhabited the place, might, miraculous to say, have blown loose in a cosmic wind and drifted here to our spinning globe, seeding everything we know, including the great and troubling argument between religion and science. The 2 research devices are named Spirit and Opportunity, as if the project were intended at last to create a team from these often opposing forces. It has been an awe-inspiring experience to watch these little emissaries of our curiosity make their journey through space and land like bouncing balls in a place so far away we cannot imagine the distance, though we can cross it. They release themselves from their protective shells in response to messages beamed from Earth. Errors in the software? No problem. New instructions are beamed from home base, and the little brain is reconfigured. The rover, rolling off its platform, drilling into Martian rock, sending snapshots instantly back home through space. The scientists and engineers have worked in collaboration as musical and passionate as a symphony orchestra to accomplish this, and their joy is beautiful to behold. How the knowledge will be used by Opportunity, if you will forgive my appropriating these names and returning them to their earthbound meanings, remains a cautionary tale. No green-thinking poet could celebrate transforming the culture of obsessive consumerism to another planet. It is how the knowledge will be used by Spirit that draws me to the curious phenomenon of the rabbit on Mars. Along with the panoramic images of barren, rusty soil and rock circulating on the internet, that collective unconscious of the technological that hovers over the surface of Earth, came a fuzzy, imprecise image of an object that appears to have very long, erect, and pointed ears. It was graced with the caption, "A rabbit on Mars?" ? It's hardly the first time that human beings have projected their imaginations out into space. It isn't even the first time the projections have taken the form of a rabbit. The Maya saw a leaping rabbit, the special pet of their moon goddess, where Americans see the man in the moon, and Japanese moon gazers see a rabbit making a rice cake. Of course, everyone got the joke that there are no Martian bunnies hopping up to welcome our team of digital explorers. It turned out that the rabbit photographed by Spirit was a tatter of the protective balloon that had helped cushion the spacecraft's landing. A momentary illusion, though it struck the imagination with silly and pleasurable force. Spirit, of course, will be struck when and if science finds life on other planets. And many astronomers and evolutionary biologists agree that it really is a matter of when and not if. Now that we know planets are not an entirely exceptional phenomenon in the universe, and therefore the conditions suitable for life may not be limited to those on Earth. How far we have come from war of the worlds, as our scientific instruments have extended our eyes into far space, altering our picture of what we will find there, so that we can now imagine the extraterrestrial not as a mechanical warrior sent to conquer our planet, but as a benign, fuzzy, harmless, and familiar creature, a vegetarian, an animal sent to deliver baskets of candies to children at Easter time. Is the appeal of this image an instruction to ourselves, meant to calm us, to assuage the fears that our sense of ourselves and our world may soon be sent reeling? What will it mean, even if all we find out there are microbes living in ice? Will our God be their God? Will life itself become our God? Will we be humbled into a greater reverence and hunger for knowledge, as people were by the Copernican revolution? Will life become a dime a dozen happenstance to be owned, manipulated, destroyed, and devoured, with an attitude of dismissal even greater than we've accomplished here on our gorgeous home planet? How could we know what rearrangement our spirits will undergo when such knowledge comes to us? What better guide for us, if only in play, than the animals who have been with us from the start, real and imagined? The animals who live in us as the matter of our genes and the spirit of our imaginations, who live with us as our teachers and companions and neighbors. The animals who were our first gods in the childhood of humanity. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. Alison has graciously agreed to answer some of them. So someone like to start? And I think we can just be loud and ask them from... Yeah.
Yes?
I'm not going to stand if that's okay.
That's okay, as long as you can bellow out your question so people can hear it.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Earlier this week you talked about how you choose between genre during the craft talk. You mentioned a little bit about that. I'm a first-year poet here who has never written any prose other than assignments for classes or writing essays. And I'm sort of curious if you could speak about impulse and process with nonfiction versus poetry, or maybe perhaps what in your mind lives in the space between the two. I don't really have a formulated question, but I'm fascinated with nonfiction, and I don't even know what it is.
Well, join the club. I mean, it's such an interesting time in creative nonfiction because there's so much going on with hybrid forms and collage forms and lyric essay. And it's just an extremely interesting time, particularly for the essay and also for the memoir. But I think there's an easy correspondence between poetry and nonfiction because, you know, as a poet, you have to find a form, and you're generally finding it through an associative process. And you may be ripping off an image or some cadences in the language, or, you know, it's hard to actually describe how a poem unfolds. An essay is often very much like that, as opposed to the essay if you wrote for freshman English. You know, the personal essay or the memoir has that same sort of associative, well, I'm going to start here because it's interesting. And then you unfold it in that same way, trusting your intuition and trusting that you can not only create scenes in an essay, but you can think out loud. So all the things they tell you not to do in fiction and poetry, you know, shut down the cat, Well, in the essay, you get to do all the telling you want to do. You get to think out loud. You get to say, I'm confused. I don't know the answer. Here are 5 questions I've got, and you can let those questions shape a form. So it's fun. And I think that you should probably just experiment with a kind of essay that's a riff on something that is a question in your mind. Why something that you keep thinking about. You don't know why you keep thinking about it. But I think poets make an easy transition to writing associative essays. So read them and give it a shot, basically. I often don't know why I choose to write an essay or a poem. A lot of my poems, and some of these that I read tonight, probably feel a little bit like essays. They're a little bit thinky. They've got a little bit of a narrative line. They unfold associatively. But there's a lot more compression to the poem and less of the telling. It's a fairly intuitive thing, making the decision which way you're going to go with a given piece. I don't know if that's helpful.
But it just makes my problem worse.
Yeah, of course. Great. Glad to be of service.
Question?
Yes.
I know that you read about place a lot, especially like environmental settings that mean quite a bit to you. And I live in a dairy farm, and I'm a first-year fiction writer. And something that I'm struggling with is trying to, in my writing, get across to people that land, you can have an emotional attachment to it, and that's kind of hard to get across in writing. And so I'm just wondering how, when you're writing about like a natural environment or setting that means something to you emotionally, like you have a significant attachment to it,
Right.
like how do you go about trying to convey that in your writing without overwhelming the reader?
Yeah, well, I always remember something that poet Frank Bedart said. He was talking about poems, of course, but it might apply to all genres. We have a tendency, we want to give the reader that epiphany of how much the land means to us, and so we just say, here's my epiphany. And what Bedart said is, they won't get it. He said, you have to dramatize access to the epiphany. So you have to sort of go on an imaginative journey where you think about what has happened in your experience that has brought you to that, and create some of that as a kind of trail so that you woo the reader into coming to that place rather than expecting them just to arrive side by side with you. I mean, is that at all helpful? I've always loved that. You have to dramatize access to the epiphany. So that comes down to the craft. It's just, you can't just rip off the great feeling you have for the land. You have to sort of manipulate the reader through that dramatic development to get there with you. I don't write fiction, so ask your fiction professor whether that makes sense or not. That's what a poet says. Is there another question someone would like to ask? Yes.
Have you ever written Absidarian?
Excuse me?
Have you ever written Absidarian?
I have written an Absidarian.
And what is a good way to go about doing that?
Oh, it's really fun. Does everybody know what an Absidarian is? This is a poem where you can structure it a lot of different ways, but usually each line begins with the letters of the alphabet, so that if you just read the first letter of all the lines down, you'd have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So it's a fun structure. And so what's the question, how to do it?
How did you just go about doing that? What's a good way to start brainstorming?
Well, you've got to have a subject that is broad enough to allow you free reign and lots of images, so it doesn't sound too mechanistic. I did one years ago. It was called Light Birds on a Red Brick Wall. And I was in love at the time, which helped a lot. And the person I was in love with was a photographer, and he'd taken this beautiful photograph of light that was somehow bouncing off windows onto the brick side of a building outdoors. And they were just mysterious. And so there was that image, and I had a lot of surrounding image because it was a city landscape. An Absidarian can be very much like a jazz riff, where, if you play jazz or listen to jazz, with jazz you'll have a tune, and you might be playing the chords of the tune with your left hand, and you know what the form is going to be of those chords. You know when they're going to show up and in what order, etc. The alphabet is like the left hand. But what happens when you do the improv of a jazz tune is that you're not playing the melody anymore. You're still playing, but you're allowing your right hand to do whatever it wants. And so there's a playfulness. The control comes, with the left hand or the alphabet, and then the playfulness comes with the fact that you really can go kind of wild, but you will always come back to the form that's being established by the alphabet. So it's fun. I think it's one of the forms that's fun. You should just allow yourself to be playful with it, for starters. Yes?
There's so much visual in the way you describe your own work, within your work, but also how you describe the process. And I wonder if you've ever done any art, any sculpture.
No.
Whether it's just sensitivity.
My daughter's a visual artist. No, I'm not at all a visual artist. I'm really untalented, in that respect. I'm a pretty decent gardener, but my daughter got the visual art. Jane. One more? Anywhere? Oh, yes.
I'm not really sure if it's a question or not, but just a series of things that you're reading made me think of, and I wanted to see if you could speak to. Because one of the things that I'm very interested in is this idea of human specialness as opposed to our pluralistic or atavistic side. And obviously you're celebrating both. You say you want to see what human beings are capable of, watch Curiosity,
Yeah.
drop onto Mars or negotiate down to Mars. But at the same time, you're also seemingly in the poems and in nonfiction always longing for something more primitive, something simpler, or maybe not simpler, but more primitive. And one of the other things that I noticed in your writing is the way that almost all of you pivot on memory and deep memory. Sometimes a particular memory, and sometimes this is more general human memory of the past. And so I was just wondering if memory is for you a key component of the thing that separates humans from our animal brothers and sisters, or not, because we were talking about the lives of the elephants, and all of those things are just really compelling to me.
Well, they've done MRIs of elephants' brains, and they have brain structures that suggest that elephants really do have tremendous capacity for memory, and their behaviors suggest that as well. So we're not the only ones who have memory by any means, and certainly the musical compositions of whales, the collective musical compositions of whales, must require memory. So I wouldn't say that, and I'm extremely interested in the range of ways that sentience occurs across the natural world, and we happen to have a wonderful set of skills, but we're really no better than any other creature, and I don't think any more entitled to take more than our share than any other creatures. But I don't think I'm not longing to go back to anything, and I'm not longing to go back to a simple life. I think we have to go forward, and I am often critical when people say, oh, let's go back to the Pleistocene. We have to get rid of all of this technology. I mean, unless something absolutely appallingly horrible happens on this planet, that is highly unlikely. We are a technological people, and we're trying to learn how to be a technological creature without destroying one another and the systems that support our existence. And we don't know how to do that yet. We're right on the cusp, and it probably is a cusp if there are other intelligent civilizations out there. They probably made it through that and figured it out. Likely they have, some of the astronomers say. But that's the kind of keyhole that we're trying to get ourselves through. And so I am interested in how we are able to become a technological society that's both sustainable and more just than the one we've got, and that some of the bad behavior of human beings against other species and against each other when we lived in very small communities the degree of wounding and damage remains invisible. Now it is all so visible to us. We are so profoundly aware of our violence to one another and the planet and habitats and other species. And I think we don't know how much we can change. You know, we've never been in a situation like this where we had as much knowledge and as much grief and much awareness of something in us that feels it's not acceptable, even though we can't yet seem to stop the violent behavior. But I think that the period of, and this book, I read you some cheery pieces. There are some pieces that are extremely depressing in this book, and there's a lot of grief in this book, because I think part of what we're going through is learning to get past the psychic numbing that says we don't want to think about the degree of damage we've caused because it's too painful. I think a lot of people can't think about the extinction crisis because it's unbearable to think about, you know, the numbers of animals that are leaving the planet and are not going to return. So I think that one step in our trying to see if we can do better is acknowledging that we feel a great deal of grief about this, and it's and when we deal with other kinds of loss, when someone we love dies, we have learned in our psychologically smart era that we come together. We talk about how badly we feel. We work together to try to comfort one another and figure out what we need to do to recover and go on with life and feel good about life again. And I think that part of what we're going through now is a period of collective grief, really acknowledging those aspects of the human resume which are just so profoundly lamentable, and figuring out whether there's enough energy that comes out of that grief that can be turned into a moral agency where we can do things a little better. I'm not a apocalyptic thinker. I love human beings. I love having the opportunity to be one. You know, and I hope for us that we can learn. We're very good learners, and we often learn best under the greatest challenges. And certainly climate change and the loss of biodiversity and cultural diversity, these are the biggest challenges human beings have had to face in a long time. This might bring out better things in us as we try to find the skills to do better. Sort of a long answer, but I don't want people to leave thinking, oh, let's go back to a simple way of life. No, it can't happen. That's, you know.
Thank you so much, Alison. Let's give her a round of applause.